The exiles' arrival, the transport vessel Retribution shuddered as it broke through Cathara Prime's crimson atmosphere, its hull screaming against the alien air. Former Colonel Zane Voss pressed his face against the reinforced porthole, watching the desolate landscape rush up to meet them. Jagged mountains of black obsidian stretched endlessly beneath swirling clouds that rained acid every few hours. This wasn't just a prison planet. It was hell with gravity. "Welcome to your new home." "Traitor?" sneered the guard captain, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Hope you're as tough as your court-martial records suggest, because you're about to find out what real monsters look like." Zane said nothing. He'd stopped defending himself months ago when the military tribunal decided that questioning orders made him a threat to Earth's expansion policies. His tactical brilliance had won them 3 colonial wars. But the moment he'd refused to authorize the orbital bombardment of civilian settlements, he'd become expendable. The ship touched down with bone-jarring force at what passed for a landing pad, a cleared section of crystalline ground surrounded by towering spires of natural rock formation. Through the viewports, Zane could see shapes moving in the shadows between the spires, too large and wrong-shaped to be human. This was where the Galactic Coalition sent its most dangerous criminals, the ones too valuable to execute but too dangerous to imprison anywhere civilized. "Out!" barked the guard, activating the magnetic restraints around Zane's wrists. "You've got 60 seconds before we're gone, and trust me, you don't want to still be standing here when the locals get curious." Zane stepped onto the alien soil, feeling the planet's heavier gravity immediately. The air tasted of sulfur and ozone, making his lungs burn with each breath. Behind him, the transport's engines were already spinning up for departure. The guards hadn't even bothered to remove his restraints. Apparently they figured the planet would kill him before he could worry about locked manacles. As the ship disappeared into the red-tinged sky, Zane found himself alone on what looked like the surface of a distant moon. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of something howling in the obsidian canyons. He began walking toward what looked like structures in the distance, his military training automatically cataloging potential threats and escape routes. He didn't make it 50 meters before they found him. The first creature emerged from behind a crystalline formation with the fluid grace of a natural predator. It stood nearly 3 meters tall on 4 powerful legs, its hide covered in armored plates that shifted from deep purple to black as it moved. 6 eyes arranged around an elongated skull tracked his movement with predatory focus, and when it opened its mouth, Zane counted 3 rows of serrated teeth designed for rending flesh from bone. "Human," it spoke in accented standard, the universal translator implant in Zane's ear struggling with the creature's vocal structure. "Fresh meat arrives on Cathara. I am Vex of the Stone Claw clan. You will come with me or become my next meal." "I'll come with you," Zane replied calmly, noting how the creature's posture suggested it was more curious than hostile. In his experience, truly dangerous predators didn't announce themselves. They simply killed. Though I should mention these restraints might slow us down. Vex studied the magnetic bonds with what might have been amusement. One casual swipe of his claws severed the restraints as if they were made of paper. "The Coalition's toys," he growled dismissively. "Follow, move slowly. Do not run unless I tell you to run. Do not look directly at any of the Apex Caste members we may encounter." "Apex Caste?" Zane asked as they began walking toward the distant structures. "The strongest of the strong. The survivors who have proven themselves beyond question." Vex's tone carried something Zane couldn't quite identify. Respect mixed with fear. There are perhaps 20 across all of Cathara Prime. They do not hunt for food or territory. They hunt because it is their nature, and everything else exists as potential prey. The structures turned out to be a massive complex carved directly into the mountainside, a testament to both alien engineering and desperate survival. Hundreds of different species moved through corridors and chambers that had been adapted to accommodate everything from gas-breathing methane dwellers to silicon-based life forms that fed on raw minerals. It was like walking through a gallery of nightmares, each creature more perfectly adapted for violence than the last. "This is the Convergence," Vex explained as they passed through what looked like a trading post where beings exchanged everything from weapons to body parts. Neutral ground where the clans gathered to trade, negotiate, and occasionally settle disputes without triggering clan wars that could damage the mountain complex. Zane noticed how other creatures reacted to Vex's presence, respectful acknowledgement, mixed with careful distance. The Stoneclaw clan apparently held significant influence in this hierarchy of predators, but he also noticed something else. The way conversations stopped when certain areas of the complex were mentioned, and how even the most aggressive-looking creatures would glance nervously toward the deeper levels of the mountain. "Tell me about Krugen," Zane said quietly. Vex stopped walking so abruptly that Zane nearly collided with his armored hide, the creature's 6 eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. "Where did you hear that name?" "I didn't. I observed." Zane gestured toward the beings around them. "Every species here is a predator of some kind, built for violence and survival. But they're all afraid of something deeper in this mountain. The fear is consistent across radically different biologies, which suggests the threat is beyond physical. That level of universal terror has a name, and judging by your reaction, that name is Krugen." For a long moment, Vex studied the human with something approaching respect. "You are more observant than most fresh meat." "Yes. Krugen rules Kithara, Prime. He is what you might call the apex of apex predators, the last survivor of the Nethys system, after his entire star cluster was consumed by dark matter storms. What makes him so feared? It is not just his strength, though he could tear through battlecruiser hulls with his bare claws. It is not just his intelligence, though he has outmaneuvered military strategists from a dozen species. It is what he has become after watching everything he ever cared about die screaming in the void." Vex's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "He is rage incarnate, preserved in a form that cannot die and cannot forget. The strongest creatures in this galaxy will not look him in the eye, because to do so is to see the reflection of entropy itself." They continued deeper into the complex, passing through areas designated for different security levels. Zane noted the progression, from general population areas where conflicts were common, to restricted zones where only proven survivors were allowed, to sealed sections that required multiple biometric confirmations. With each level, the ambient noise decreased and the sense of lurking menace increased. "Where exactly are we going?" Zane asked. "To register you with the clan leaders. You cannot survive alone on Kithara Prime. The environment will kill you within days if the predators do not. You need protection, and protection must be earned." Vex paused at a sealed doorway, covered in warning symbols from at least 20 different languages. "This is where you prove you deserve to live another day." The chamber beyond was an arena carved from living rock, its walls scarred by countless battles. The floor was stained with the blood of dozens of different species, and the air hummed with barely contained violence. Around the elevated viewing areas, creatures that defied classification watched with the patient hunger of apex predators waiting for entertainment. At the center of the arena stood 3 beings that represented different approaches to survival on Kithara Prime. The first was a mass of writhing tentacles surrounding a central brain case, pure intelligence adapted for manipulation and control. The second was a bipedal creature covered in natural armor plating, built like a living siege engine designed for straightforward destruction. The third was something that seemed to shift between states of matter, never quite solid, never quite energy, the kind of threat that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. "Survive against one," announced a voice that seemed to come from the arena walls themselves. "Prove your worth to claim protection, fail, and feed the mountain." Zane stepped into the arena, his mind already analyzing his opponents and formulating strategies. He had no weapons, no armor, and no allies. What he did have was 40 years of military experience and a tactical mind that had won wars against impossible odds. As the 3 creatures began to circle him, Zane couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning. If these were the gatekeepers, what did that make the thing that even they feared to face directly? Deep in the mountain's core, something ancient and terrible stirred at the scent of new prey, and for the first time in decades, Krugen opened eyes that held the cold light of dead stars. The inevitable confrontation. 3 months had passed since Zane's arrival on Cathara Prime, and the mountain complex had begun to feel less like a prison and more like a chessboard where he was finally learning the rules. His victory in the initial trial had earned him a place among the Stoneclaw clan, but more importantly, it had established him as something the other predators hadn't expected, a tactician who could turn their own strengths against them. Word of the humans' unconventional victories had spread through the convergence like wildfire. He had defeated the Void Shifter by using the arena's electromagnetic field generators to destabilize its energy matrix. The armored siege creature had fallen when Zane convinced it to charge at what appeared to be him, only to discover it was attacking its own reflection in a polished metal surface while the real Zane struck from behind. The tentacled intelligence had been the most challenging, until Zane realized that its enhanced cognitive abilities made it vulnerable to sensory overload, and he'd used the arena's sound system to create a feedback loop that left the creature writhing in neurological agony. But these victories had come with a price. Each win elevated his status in the complex hierarchy, and elevation meant moving closer to the apex, closer to Krugen. "You have attracted attention you do not want," Vex warned him as they walked through the deeper levels of the mountain complex. The Stoneclaw warrior had become something resembling a friend over the past months, though friendship among apex predators was a fluid concept. "The overseer of the deep levels has been asking questions about the human who fights with his mind, instead of his claws." The overseer was a massive crystalline being named Thrakos, one of the few creatures on Cathara Prime who had direct access to Krugen's domain. According to the whispered rumors that circulated through the convergence, Thrakos had served as Krugen's herald and executioner for over a century, carrying out the apex predator's will throughout the prison planet. "Let him ask," Zane replied, though he felt the familiar chill of impending danger. "I didn't come here by choice, but I won't spend what's left of my life cowering in the shadows either." They were interrupted by a sound that made every creature in the corridor freeze, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the mountain's core itself. It was a summoning call, one that hadn't been heard in the convergence for nearly a decade. Thrakos emerged from the shadows like a living cathedral of crystal and dark light. The overseer stood 4 meters tall, his faceted body refracting the corridor's illumination into prismatic patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he spoke, his voice resonated through multiple frequencies simultaneously. "The human will come with me," Thrakos announced, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Krugen has become curious about the one who wins through weakness rather than strength." "It's not weakness," Zane said quietly, meeting the overseer's multifaceted gaze. "It's efficiency." Something that might have been amusement flickered through Thrakos's crystalline structure. "You will have the opportunity to explain the distinction to one who has heard every justification for failure that sentient life can devise. Follow." The descent into Krugen's domain took them through sections of the mountain complex that few beings had ever seen. Ancient passages carved by the planet's original inhabitants led deeper into chambers that predated the prison colony by millennia. The walls here weren't just stone. They were fused with some kind of organic material that pulsed with its own bioluminescent rhythm, as if the mountain itself were alive and breathing. "Tell me about his species," Zane said as they walked through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. "What were the Nethys before the dark matter storms destroyed their system?" Thrakos's crystalline form chimed with harmonics that might have been surprise. "You seek to understand your predator. Most simply beg for mercy or threaten violence they cannot deliver. Understanding is the foundation of strategy, and strategy is how the weak survive the strong. The Nethys were builders and gardeners," Thrakos explained, his voice carrying an unexpected note of something like sadness. "They cultivated entire star systems, turned barren worlds into gardens that could sustain billions of beings. Krugen was their greatest philosopher-warrior, devoted to protecting the beauty they created. When the dark matter storms came, he watched 7 billion years of careful cultivation consumed in moments. The survivors were evacuated to other systems, but Krugen..." The overseer paused. "Krugen chose to remain, to bear witness, to remember. And that broke him." "No," Thrakos corrected, his crystals ringing with cold precision. "That perfected him. Krugen became exactly what a universe of entropy and random destruction deserved, an agent of inevitable ending. He no longer fights to protect or preserve. He fights because existence itself is the enemy, and every victory is a small revenge against the cosmos that took everything he loved. They had reached the bottom of the descent, emerging into a vast chamber that defied the mountain's exterior dimensions. The space was circular, easily a kilometer across, with walls that stretched up into darkness beyond the reach of any light source. At the center of the chamber sat a structure that looked like a throne carved from a single piece of midnight black stone, surrounded by the preserved remains of every creature foolish enough to challenge the apex predator over the past 2 centuries. And on that throne sat Krugen. Zane had expected a monster, some towering beast of tooth and claw. Instead, he found himself looking at a being that might once have been beautiful. Krugen stood barely 2 meters tall, his form humanoid but perfected in ways that suggested evolutionary pressures beyond anything Earth had produced. His skin was the deep blue-black of space between stars, and his eyes held the cold light of dying suns. What made him terrible wasn't his size or obvious physical power. It was the absolute stillness with which he observed the world, as if everything he saw was already dead, and he was simply waiting for reality to catch up to his perception. The human approaches, Krugen spoke without moving, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Zane's bones. I have watched your victories, little tactician. You defeat apex predators by making them defeat themselves. A philosophy of victory through the weaknesses of others. Every strength becomes a weakness when pushed beyond its limits, Zane replied, forcing himself to meet those stellar eyes. The greatest predators fall to their own nature when that nature is properly manipulated. Something that wasn't quite. A smile touched Krugen's features. And what weakness do you perceive in me, strategist? Zane took a breath that tasted of ozone and ancient stone. This was the moment everything had been building toward, not a physical confrontation but a battle of understanding against nihilism. You're not a predator at all. You're a gardener whose garden was destroyed, and you've convinced yourself that the only response to loss is to ensure nothing else can ever grow. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Krugen rose from his throne with fluid grace, and for the first time since Zane's arrival, the apex predator showed genuine interest. Explain. Every victory you've won, every challenger you've defeated, you've preserved them. Their remains surround your throne like specimens in a collection. You're not destroying them, you're cataloging them, keeping a record of what was, because you can't bear to let anything pass into true oblivion. Zane gestured to the preserved remains around the throne. This isn't the lair of a destroyer. It's a museum curated by someone who understands the value of what's being lost. Krugen was silent for a long moment, those dying star eyes studying Zane with an intensity that felt like being dissected at the molecular level. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. In 2 centuries, you are the first to see the truth rather than the terror. Yes, I preserve them. Every species, every individual who proves worthy of my attention. When the universe finally dies its heat death, something will remain to remember what was beautiful about existence before entropy claimed everything. Then you haven't given up, Zane pressed. You've just convinced yourself that preservation requires isolation. But preservation without continuation is just elaborate suicide. And what would you have me do, human tactician? Rebuild? Create? Watch new beauty bloom only to see it consumed by the same forces that destroyed everything I once protected? Zane smiled, and for the first time since entering Krugen's domain, he felt like he was on familiar ground. I'd have you do what every good gardener does when blight destroys their first crop. Plant again. But this time plant something strong enough to survive what destroyed the original. The silence that followed was broken by a sound Zane realized was laughter. Not the cruel amusement of a predator, but the genuine surprise of a being discovering something unexpected. Krugen stepped closer, and Zane could see the careful cultivation in every aspect of the apex predator's appearance, from the precisely maintained condition of his preserved museum to the deliberate arrangement of his throne room. You propose to make me a teacher rather than a destroyer, Krugen said, his voice carrying new harmonics that suggested possibilities rather than endings. To take what I have learned about survival and use it to create something that can endure where my original garden could not. The strongest creatures in the universe won't look you in the eye because they see their own ending reflected there, Zane replied. But what if instead they saw their potential? What if the apex predator of Cathera Prime became the apex cultivator, teaching survival instead of simply demonstrating dominance? Krugen extended one perfectly formed hand, and Zane saw that his fingers ended not in claws but in the delicate manipulators of a being designed for precise, careful work. When the apex predator spoke again, his voice carried the first notes of hope Zane had heard since arriving on the prison planet. Very well, tactician. You have shown me a strategy I had not considered. But know this, if we begin this work, there will be no retreat. To build something worthy of preservation in a universe of entropy requires commitment beyond what most beings can imagine. Zane clasped the offered hand, feeling the strength that could crush mountains tempered by the control that had once shaped gardens across star systems. Then it's fortunate I've had practice making the impossible work with whatever materials I'm given. As they stood together in the vast chamber, surrounded by the preserved remains of challenges past, both beings understood that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of Cathera Prime. The apex predator had found a new purpose, and the prison planet would never be the same.